Hello and welcome back to this channel. My name is Prabhat. Today we will be discussing about privatization of banks. An announcement was made by the Finance Minister in the budget of 2021-22 to privatize two public sector banks as part of the divestment policy to garner 1.75 lakh crore rupees. In this video, we will discuss about privatization of banks. To begin with, let us understand what is meant by privatization of banks. Privatization is a process whereby the government ceases to keep control over the ownership and management in the government-owned company and transfers the same to a privately owned company. Such a step is taken by the government thinking that privatization will bring in more efficiency and turn the debt-ridden loss-making government entity into a profit-making one. So why did the need arise for the privatization of banks? 1. Rising number of NPAs. The public sector banks are burdened with non-performing assets leading to decreased profitability and poor performance record. To unburden itself from such stressed assets, the government decided to privatize public sector banks. Second, increase in the lending capacity. The government feels that merging of public sector banks with the private banks will increase the lending capacity and risk-taking appetite. Third, vision for future of banks. The move of privatization is in line with the long-term vision of the government to have a limited number of public sector banks and the rest of the banking services be taken care of by the private sector. 4. Creation of strong banks. The government wishes to have strong banks with the capacity to finance rupee guzzling infrastructure projects, keeping in mind the rising needs of India. 5th. Recommendation from several committees. Recommendations have been made from several committees such as the Narasimhan Committee, PJ Nayak Committee and an integral working group of RBI to keep the government ownership below 51% in the public sector banks. Now let us understand some of the concerns related to privatization of banks. 1. There are always concerns of crony capitalism related to private sector banks. There are fears among certain quarters that privatization will end up selling government ownership to some players. Now let us understand some of the concerns related to privatization of banks. There are always concerns of crony capitalism related to privatization of banks. There are fears among certain quarters that the privatization will end up selling the government ownership to the same players who are already defaulting in making payments to these banks. Financial exclusion of weaker sections. Private banks are driven with the objective of profit making. So they will cater to those sections that have money and ignore the less privileged ones. The objective of financial inclusion will take a big hit because of the privatization of banks. There are job fears among the existing employees of the banks. One of the most overlooked concerns during mergers is the insecurities of the workers of the banks. If the insecurities of the workers are not resolved, then their actions may hinder the merger and may even lead to failure of the proposed merger. Deficiency in the regulation of bank activities. There are concerns about the regulation of these private banks in future since many cases of frauds committed by the private banks have come to the fore in recent times. Therefore, keeping all these concerns in mind, the government must refrain from blind privatization of public sector banks. Instead, these public sector banks must be converted into the form of corporations to end bureaucratic functioning and retain government's control over these banks at the same time. Having discussed about privatization of banks, we must also look at the future of banking, which lies in the branchless neo-banking services. Here, the banking services will be provided through digital means using superior technology and artificial intelligence without the need to maintain physical branches of banks. We hope you like this piece of information. For more such videos, please subscribe to this channel.